the worst possible teachers. Their swing is not yours. Their game is not yours. Watching them for years can leave a golfer no closer to a lower score, sometimes further from it. One woman said this out loud in 1969 to an audience that worshiped two men above all others. She said, "Watch me instead." Nobody listened. Decades of data would later prove she was right all along. In the summer of 1969, Golf Digest published an article that stopped readers cold. It was written by a woman named Susie Berning, fresh off winning the US Open the year before. The title alone was a provocation. To improve your game, watch me, not Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus. At the time, that was close to heresy. Arnold Palmer and Jack Nicklaus were not just champions. They were the entire mental picture of what good golf looked like for an entire generation of players. And here was a woman telling them to look somewhere else. Her argument was not about talent. She never claimed to hit the ball farther or straighter than either man. Her point was about structure, about what kind of golf was actually being played, hole by hole, decision by decision. The men's tour, she said, was built on power. Long courses, drivers into greens, approach shots played with short irons because there was simply nothing left to cover. That was not the golf most people played on a Saturday, and it was not the golf the women's tour played either. The LPGA in her era played shorter courses. On a typical hole, that meant a driver followed by a 3 or 4 iron into the green, a completely different problem than a short iron in hand. She wrote that a strong male professional could mishit a shot and still recover through pure strength, muscling the ball into position with his hands and arms alone. Most golfers do not have that option. When their swing does not work, there is nothing left to save it. So her case was simple, even if it was unwelcome. If someone wanted to actually lower their score, watching two men who were structurally playing a different sport would teach them very little. Watching the women's tour, where the math on every hole looked closer to their own, would teach them far more. She was 27 years old when she wrote it. She had no way of knowing that more than 50 years later, the numbers would prove her right. Susie Berning had no launch monitor, no tracking data, no way to measure anything beyond what she saw with her own eyes. She was working entirely from feel and experience. Decades later, modern golf finally built the tools to check her math, and the numbers did not just support her. They confirmed she had understated the case. Start with distance. Tracking data from millions of real amateur rounds puts the average recreational male driving distance at roughly 224 yards. The average PGA Tour player is well north of 300. At that gap, the two are barely the same sport anymore. Now look at where the LPGA lands. Top players on the women's tour typically drive somewhere between 250 and 270 yards. Still far past most weekend golfers, as expected from elite athletes, but structurally an entirely different picture from the men's tour. The approach clubs those players carry into a green and the decisions tied to those distances map onto an average golfer's game in a way PGA Tour strategy simply does not. Consider a golfer carrying a 15 handicap, hitting a hybrid or a 4-iron into a par 4. An LPGA player hitting a 4 or 5 iron into that same green is solving nearly the same problem with nearly the same margin for error. There is something to actually learn from watching how she handles that shot, her tempo, her setup, her patience. A tour professional hitting a gap wedge into the same hole is solving a completely different problem. Watching him solve it says almost nothing about solving yours. The pattern holds around the green as well. Elite LPGA players do not make everything from 20 or 30 feet away. What separates them is pace control. Rolling the ball just close enough to guarantee the next stroke is a tap-in instead of chasing a make and risking an extra stroke. That is a decision made before the stroke, not during it. Most amateurs take 3 strokes on the green instead of 2 because they are trying to make the shot and avoid that extra stroke at the same time, and those two goals pull against each other. None of this was available to Berning in 1969. She built her entire argument from instinct and observation alone. Now there is a number attached to almost every sentence she wrote, and every one of them agrees with her. If the argument was this sound, the obvious question is why it went nowhere. The answer has very little to do with golf and almost everything to do with who was allowed to be believed in 1969. Golf Digest's readers at the time were almost entirely men, most of them raised on the same two heroes. Suggesting there was a better teacher elsewhere was already a hard sell to that audience. Suggesting that teacher was a woman made it, for many readers, unthinkable. Women's golf in that era was barely visible to the mainstream sports audience. Tournaments went uncovered, players went unrecognized, and an entire tour full of world-class competitors existed almost entirely outside the national conversation. Into that silence, a 27-year-old woman published an article telling the most powerful audience in the sport to stop watching its own heroes. It was not that her logic failed, it was that the audience was never built to accept the source. So the article ran, made a modest ripple, and slowly disappeared into old back issues. No one built a following around it, no one revisited it as the years passed and the game changed around her thesis. Susie Berning kept playing, kept winning majors, kept raising a family alongside a golf career. Few of her peers were attempting at the same time. She passed away in October of the year 2024, at the age of 83. Most of the golf world barely noticed, which is, in a strange way, exactly the point. A woman worked out something true about the game decades before anyone had the tools to prove it, and the golf world spent over 50 years catching up to a truth it never bothered to write down. To understand where that argument came from, it helps to go back to where Susie Berning came from herself, and golf was nowhere near the plan. She was born on the 22nd of July in 1941 in Pasadena, California. When she was 13, her family moved to Oklahoma City, and she settled into a life that had far more to do with horses than with golf clubs. She was, by her own description, a cowgirl, more interested in riding than in anything played with a stick and a ball. Her family lived across the street from a public golf course called Lincoln Park. When she asked the head professional there if she could work as a caddy alongside her older brothers, she was told plainly that girls did not do that kind of work. So she turned her attention back to horses instead, taking on the job of walking a young colt near the course. One afternoon, a passing train let out a whistle that spooked the colt. It broke loose and bolted straight onto the golf course, tearing up several greens before anyone could catch it. The frightened teenager was hauled in front of the same professional who had turned her away, convinced, at first, that she had done it out of spite. Once he realized the truth, he made her an offer instead of a punishment. Teach his own children to ride, and the damage would be forgotten. It was through that same man that she was invited, a while later, to a clinic. The golfer running it was Patty Berg, one of the founding legends of the women's game. Watching Berg work a crowd with humor and warmth, something shifted. She sold her horses, bought a car, and started driving herself to the course. What followed came fast. 3 straight state high school championships, multiple city amateur titles, and then something that had never happened before at Oklahoma City University. The first golf scholarship ever offered there to a woman on a team that did not exist yet for women, so she played alongside the men instead. She turned professional in 1964 and was named Rookie of the Year in her very first season. What came next was a career built less on volume than on knowing exactly when to peak. Her breakthrough major came at the U.S. Open in 1968 at a course called Mosalem Springs. She won it only 7 weeks after her wedding, beating the legendary Mickey Wright by 3 strokes, leading from start to finish. It was the first sign of something that would define her entire career. She kept winning the biggest events in the game while playing far fewer tournaments than almost anyone else on tour. 4 years later, at Winged Foot in 1972, she delivered one of the strangest championship rounds in the history of the U.S. Open. She opened with a 79, still to this day, the highest first round ever shot by an eventual champion. The course had turned soft and long after days of storms, and drives were plugging in the fairway. On the closing holes, with the tournament suddenly within reach, she drove the ball onto a demanding par 3 and rolled in a birdie from 20 feet to seal the win. She would later call it the shot of the tournament. The following year, defending her title at Rochester, she fell behind after a rough second round and made a decision most players would never risk in the middle of a major. She changed her entire stroke on the green, working with a close friend to take her hands almost completely out of the motion, relying instead on her shoulders and arms like a pendulum. 2 closing rounds of 69 and 72 carried her to a 5-shot victory and back-to-back titles. One of only a handful of women in history to defend an Open championship. Running through every one of those wins was something almost nobody else on tour was attempting at the same time. She played fewer tournaments most years than her rivals, often 9 or 10 instead of 20, because she was raising 2 daughters alongside a Hall of Fame career. She missed most of one season on her honeymoon. She missed most of another while pregnant. She came back from both to win majors anyway. She said it herself, plainly, without apology. Having her own family on tour was not a distraction from her career, it was an advantage. No matter how a round went, she said, she was a mother first. That was not a compromise forced on her by the game. It was a choice she made deliberately, and one that quietly reshaped what a champion's career could look like. When her playing career finally wound down, Susie Berning did exactly what her 1969 article had argued for all along. She became a teacher. For more than 20 years, she worked with everyday golfers at courses in California and Colorado, breaking the game down into pieces a weekend player could actually use. Not power, not perfect mechanics copied from a tour swing, tempo, touch, and decision-making around the green. The same principles she had tried to explain to Golf Digest readers decades earlier. She once said all she really wanted was for people to love the game the way she did, and that teaching was how she got to share that. Recognition, when it finally came, arrived very late. Because her playing schedule had always been shaped around raising a family rather than chasing every tournament on tour, her total win count looked modest next to players who competed far more often. It took until the year 2021 for the World Golf Hall of Fame to induct her in the same class as Tiger Woods. One of the golfers on the selection committee put it simply, very few women in the history of the game had managed to win major championships while also raising a family, she said. Others would follow and be celebrated for it. Susie Berning had done it first, with almost no one watching closely enough to notice at the time. It was the same story as her article, playing out twice in one lifetime. She had been right early and right quietly, while golf's attention stayed fixed somewhere else. More than 50 years after that article ran, the gap she described has not closed, it has only grown. The men's tour keeps getting longer, further from what an ordinary round actually looks like. The women's tour has grown too, but the relationship between the two has stayed the same. One still resembles the golf most people play, the other rarely does. That was really her whole argument back in 1969, before anyone could measure it. Not that Arnold Palmer or Jack Nicklaus played worse golf, only that